So, welcome to the second episode of The Harsher Reality. And today, to talk about the state of flow, I've got my good friend Phil Best, the virtuoso pianist, composer, vocalist, music teacher, and also, I'm very happy to say, my music coach. Thank you for taking the time, Phil, and joining today.
Absolute pleasure. Good to be here.
Thank you. I thought Phil will get straight into it. No dilly-dallying. And talk about straight away what people call by different names. Some people refer to it as a state of flow. Some people call it being in the zone. And when you go back, even before, people like, I suppose, Maslow have called it peak experiences, peak performance. We've got these different names, and obviously you've been exploring this for, I'm sorry, I'm giving your age away a little bit, for probably 40 plus years. How do you think about it and see the state of flow?
Well, for me, it was something that I developed from being very young and being very anxious as a performer. So I was a very natural performer when I was a kid. I think a lot of kids are, aren't they? They just get up. I just get up, I play the piano. I had a teacher that encouraged me to improvise and just play in a very spontaneous way. And that was fine. But then when I changed teacher at the age of 9, there was a lot of pressure, and dealing with that pressure wasn't very easy. Doing lots of competitions and exams and stuff like that, to actually deal with that pressure was difficult. So I became very interested in this idea of fluency, musical fluency, this idea of being able to sort of say what you mean when you play music. So to have a sort of vocabulary, music as a language, that suddenly started to be the thing that really mattered to me. And that became very much, and has continued to be very much, part of what I consider the state of flow in music to be all about. If I'm not saying what I mean, then it's not fluent. It's sort of recited. It's like reciting a poem in a language you don't speak. You could do it, you could learn to do it, but it's not fluent. I think inside of fluency, the relationship between fluency and this drop in pressure, this performing thing, is that you become in a less reflective state, as it were. What you're doing executively and what you're thinking become one.
Right. So what you're saying is it's a very direct expression, a direct saying, without any afterthought or reflection in the moment.
So you can still put on a show, but you're not performing, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
So what I was really interested in from a very young age, and was getting out of the performance, mode, getting out of the self-conscious zone that felt horrible to me, felt like an out-of-body experience, almost like I was watching myself playing the piano, watching my fingers moving, muscle memory, drilled muscle memory, fingers just moving. Oh, what's going on? To this state where I'm just saying things to you now. I'm not self-consciously performing. A little, I suppose we're all human. There's always a bit of meta awareness, but minimizing that so that you're in the moment. You're just saying what you mean now. And to do that, I developed this idea in my mind that there were almost two selves inside me.
Okay. Two selves.
Like two selves, like two minds almost, like the mind that is thinking, doing, reflecting, judging, planning, all that sort of thing, which really needed calming down. This is the thing that I knew I needed to calm this down completely and bring it to a place where it did not feel paranoid about going wrong or anything like that. Didn't need to do a good performance. So that self, the sort of conscious mind, and then this other part of me, which I would think of as my inner musician, that could do music sort of from the body and the soul, from a place of much sort of deeper intuition, natural. So like natural flowing. I was obsessed with this idea of rhythm and flow. If I'm in flow and I'm in rhythm, then I can play well. My body knows what to do. So you have to give that free rein.
Okay.
So you're sort of, it's not that the mind needs kind of the conscious mind, the other self doesn't need kind of clamping,
Yeah.
It's got to be a fairly relaxed state, but very focused. So I worked on this from a very young age of like focusing my thinking mind to what is actually a very narrow model of how music works. Very small, no theory, no complexity, just a very simple model, which I do rhythm cells in the matrix. So rhythm cells are the vocabulary. The matrix is the groove. The matrix of rhythm is the underlying groove. It has a structure, like a syntax. Vocabulary of rhythm cells in the syntax of the matrix. A vocabulary of blocks in the syntax, the structure of the keyboard app. And that was my sort of focus, my simple, calm, clear, narrow focus. As long as I knew what rhythm cell I was playing, where it was in the matrix, as long as I knew which tonal block I was playing where in the keyboard map, moment by moment. Again, no reflection, no planning, not thinking what have I played, what am I going to play, just saying those things right now. As long as that was clear, I could let loose. Completely let loose and let the intuitive part of me, my body and soul, my inner musician, call it what you like, just play. And that seemed to put me into the most, I would almost say, ecstatic state. And it released me from all the anxiety. All the anxiety would disappear. I'd still be very active, it's still a very active state, but there would be literally, even if I was nervous performing, still no anxiety, which is great.
And what you're describing is, if we look at the other people, like, I'm sure you remember Csikszentmihalyi, people like that, when they talk about the state of flow, they actually, I think he's the one who sort of coined the specific word flow and popularized it. In any case, this kind of immersion in it, being lost in the moment, enjoyment, I'm not sure he talks about that much, but anyway, all of these things are what you're describing. So the state of ecstasy, a state of direct expression, being fully in the moment without judging the performance, which we know. What is the phrase you like to use? Do you use flow for yourself? Do you use the zone? Is there a specific word? I mean, it doesn't really matter, I suppose.
I tend to use flow since I've read Mihaly, but I call it lots of things, really. It is a sort of, I mean, I would just call it fluency, and it implies that there's a state of flow inside of fluency, because when we're not fluent, we're performing. I think what Csikszentmihalyi does bring into awareness is, it doesn't, as you say, it's not so much about, although I think he differentiates between pleasure and like a different kind of reward, like enjoyment, I think is the word he likes. But what he does talk about an awful lot is this kind of idea of intrinsic motivation.
That's right. Yeah.
That the motivation is not to get a result. The motivation is for, I would say, pleasure. I would use the word pleasure. I don't think you can separate pleasure, enjoyment, these sort of things. You end up splitting hairs. So I would say it does have to be pleasurable in order to be intrinsically motivating.
Absolutely.
So I'm doing, when I'm in a state of flow or in the zone, or I think they say in the zone in sports more, don't they?
Yes.
It's like different fields say different things. When I'm in the zone, when I'm in that state and I'm really fluent and I'm just expressing myself kind of fearlessly and openly and spontaneously. That's a big part of it as well, being kind of spontaneous. When I'm in that zone, it's pleasurable, like deeply pleasurable, and therefore intrinsically motivated. I'm not doing it for the accolades. I'm not even really doing it for I'm not even really doing it for the sake of the music, I was going to say. I mean, I am. It is all about the music when I'm doing the music, but I do music partly for the state it puts me in. Do you see what I'm saying?
For the feeling.
The feeling. So the feelings, music is about feeling. Music is perhaps the ultimate flow state, is music, in the sense that music is all about feeling. Even the most dark, tragic. I mean, you're a heavy metal fan, so you know what I'm talking about. Even the darkest music, even music that is like really, I love Rachmaninoff, you love Rachmaninoff as well, I know. So, Rachmaninoff would go to some of the most appallingly dark places, but playing it really fluently and really being in this zone that we're talking about when you play it is the most cathartic experience, which is pleasurable.
Absolutely. Ultimately, this is why we do.
Yeah. So obviously music is all about feelings. So the state of flow is all about doing things for those kinds of feelings, those feelings that are intrinsically rewarding, not rewarding for what they bring sort of after the event.
Yes, whether that be
which I think points
victory or achievement or whatever.
Exactly, which I think points to the same idea that I sort of started with, this idea of non-separation.
Yes.
There's no separation between my executive consciousness,
Yes.
like what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Another phrase he did, I don't know if he coined this phrase, I think he did, didn't he? Autotelic. I think that's
Yes.
should say.
Autotelic. I'm not sure if he. Well, it's riffing off Greek, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's a clever
but
word.
I'm not sure if. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he definitely uses it a lot,
He
and it's a good
uses
word.
it. It's a clever concept, isn't it? Because it's teleological and yet not teleological.
Yeah.
It's for goals and yet it's not for goals. The goals
Yeah.
are moment by moment. The goals are very important. I want to know what rhythm cell I'm playing. I want to know where that rhythm cell is in the structure of the groove, the matrix, the rhythmic matrix. I want to know what block I'm playing, where it is in the keyboard map, or where it is in the vocal map I'm singing. Those are goals, but
Yeah.
they are automatic because they are the music.
They are the thing. They are the very thing that we are, that you are trying to express or experience. I wanted to get a little bit inside this, Phil, for the viewers and the listeners, because you talked about the two selves. You talk about the mind, the cognitive mind, and then the sort of the other self, which is the phrases you used were body and soul. Um, and then you talked about fluency being the heart of it, that enables the stepping into a state of flow, or enabling the state of flow. Could you say a bit more about the link between fluency and the two selves, how they kind of relate and fit together?
Well, I have to say, my experience of these two selves. I mean, I won't be shy. I'll be candid. I had a difficult childhood, and I wasn't the most sane child. I was, I suffered from anxiety, and had occasionally had some funny voices in my head and things like this. So I actually thought I was a bit strange. And my mother would tell me I was very strange as well, a very weird child. So I believed that I wasn't normal, and I was very, very conscious of what you're talking about.
Right.
Very, almost like it felt a bit schizophrenic. It felt a bit weird. It felt like there were two people operating me.
Yeah.
And so it did it scare me? I don't know. It didn't scare me when I was playing the piano because it was the most blissful state imaginable. But
Yeah.
it sometimes felt a bit weird afterwards, especially if, in conversation, my mother would be telling me that I was a weird kid. I'd think, oh, crikey. So I had a very interesting experience when I was 14, where my cousin, who was quite a lot older than me and was into music, but also very into tennis, gave me a book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. And this was my first sort of validation, if you like, of this concept. I've read a lot more since. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow comes to mind, this idea of two selves. There's probably so many examples that we could
Because
come up with.
Galway himself uses the self one and self two
He calls it self one and
model.
self two. And you can imagine, I start reading this book and the overwhelming sense of relief to me that far from being crazy, I love tennis, by the way, as well. I've always enjoyed watching tennis on the TV. I've always, Wimbledon would come on every year and I would be glued to it as a kid. I loved it. Something about the game. It's so graceful. It's quite musical. Kind of fascinates me in a way that no other sport does. And so reading this book was entertaining just from that level. I didn't really know what to expect. He told me that he thought I would, because I used to talk to him and about my music and stuff because he was interested. One of the few adults that was kind of interested in what I did. And he said, I think you'll get something from this book. And he couldn't have been more right, because you can imagine, I'm saying, the first few pages, he starts on this idea of there being, two selves inhabiting you. And it's a very accurate, for me, a very accurate description of what I was doing.
Yes.
I have to really make sure that have I got these the right way around? Self one is very calm so that self two can do the intuition. I get a bit confused because I think Kahneman has them the other way around.
Yeah, I know. But now that you mentioned Kahneman, now I'm confused myself. But effectively, there's one self,
Yes,
the interfering self
that's
that
right.
gets in the way, and then there's the natural intuitive self that does quicker learning, which is the other part.
And it's kind of almost a bit genius, the intuitive self. It can already do it almost.
Yes.
It feels like that. It feels like your inner musician can already do it. That we already know how to hit an amazing smash or something, or a pounding forehand. It's already in us if you've watched someone do it. it's in you. You can do it. It's almost like a state of believing you can do it is essential first. So the mind's doubts are so crippling. I mean, unbelievably crippling. So they do need to be silent. I talk about the mind as in the conscious,
Yes,
the interfering mind.
the
That
interfering
interference
mind.
needs to stop. And I mean, it doesn't seem to come up from what I can remember. It's a long time since I read the book, but it doesn't come up with a very simple model, perhaps, of tennis like I did with music. But maybe he did. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember.
Well,
But
he does have a model, but perhaps it's not very well. Well, let me not use the word, but it's not very clearly formulated in the book.
right,
Maybe when he teaches one-to-one, he has a bit more
yeah.
detail on it. So when you talk about fluency, Phil, and models and the cognitive mind, what is it that you're sort of doing exactly that then enables the state of flow, would you say?
So the cognitive mind, this self that is critical, that is judges, that is executive, that tends to plan
Yeah,
and tends to reflect critically on what's happened. So it's in the past and the future a lot. You have to bring it out of the past and the future
yeah,
completely
yeah.
and bring it completely into the present, which is, as Maslow kind of got, this is actually quite a spiritual thing, really.
Yes, I agree.
The power of now by Eckhart Tolle. It's that idea. Everything comes to this point of now.
Yeah,
You're right in the present moment, completely immersed in the present moment, and this is a state of, I just call it focus for want of complicating the issue.
yes,
But it is a very particular quality of focus. It has to be a kind of, there has to be a lightness. It can't be like a tight concentration.
yeah,
So it has to have a certain looseness, playfulness, maybe simplicity. Simplicity is very important to me, that I'm just doing this and nothing else.
yes,
Right now, I'm just doing this. Right now, my whole attention, this packet of time, which is
yes,
because it's in rhythm, rhythm is packets of time, it's beats. In
yeah,
this beat, I am just doing this. I'm just saying this rhythm cell, and that rhythm cell is going to, I would say, walk on the keyboard. It's going to walk there. And that's it. That my full attention is on that right now. So it's all about focus. I'm focusing, calmly, simply focusing my mind on a very simple, I would say task, but I don't like the word task.
kind of like on a simple, and you use the word model, and I really like the word model. Um, on a model of what you're doing, and it, I suppose you could call it a task, but yes, you said you don't like the word task. So am I right in understanding that this is the same? Well, we don't know if it's exactly physiologically the same, but the cognitive part of the mind that would otherwise interfere, this is the part that would be occupied with the, what do we call it, the knowing, or the tracking, or the focusing, I suppose.
Focusing, I think knowing is right. There needs to be certainty for the mind. The mind doesn't operate well. That part of the mind, that particular part of the mind, does not operate well with uncertainty.
Yeah,
The other part of the mind loves uncertainty.
yeah,
Is perfectly happy to just like let go, which is the other word I use for the other half. That's the word I say focus and let go. So the other the other part of your mind, of your consciousness, the intuitive part, loves uncertainty, loves
yeah,
not knowing, loves a state of wonder. But the focusing part of the mind, the executive part of the mind, needs control. I think Mikhail talks a lot about this. This it is a sort of more teleological state. It's not it's not just, it's about goals. It's about you getting a result. It really is. And the mind is all about that. I quite like that sort of Adlerian idea that life is work, life is tasks. I do quite like it, but only that part of the mind. If the whole of life was that, it would be, well, very dismal.
yes. And the tasks are very much sort of moment by moment. It's to do with sort of being aware of each emergent moment. So if it, in tennis, for example, it would be awareness of the next moment, the stroke, the ball part, the serve, whatever it is. And in the same way, what you're talking about is it's awareness of this moment, this rhythm, packet, and the tonality that is integrated with that.
So yeah, very simply as well, this kind of very simple idea that I'm just doing this rhythm cell on this block.
Got you.
I'm now doing this rhythm cell on this block. I'm now doing this rhythm cell on this block.
Yeah.
And that now and now and now means I have no thought of before. I have no thought, excuse me, no thought of after. Sorry, I've got a
No,
cough.
that's fine. So
Excuse me.
this brings us to a very, what I find to be very crucial is to enter into a state of flow. I mean, let's stick with music because that's your domain for the moment. Is there needs to be some understanding of what it is, and you've used the word model. Could you say a bit more? So if I take a step back, and recap a little bit. So the state of flow, it's about saying things very directly in an unself-conscious way, being immersed in the moment, enjoying it. These are all sort of the hallmarks of the state of flow. And please jump in if I'm not saying it accurately enough. And then we were saying that, okay, so we have, the cognitive part of the mind, which tends to interfere. And then we have sort of, let's see, the other side of the body and soul that needs to express and sort of let go, is a word you would use and you've just mentioned. So when we talk about models, and the knowing of the craft, you've already mentioned things like simplicity. Could you say a bit more about perhaps how important models are, and what makes a good model? Because I'm sort of thinking, okay, if we take this idea, then it's surely applicable to almost any domain, any field, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I mean, music is a pretty complex thing, and I've
Yes.
managed to reduce it to a very, very simple model. I think the simplicity is a big part of what makes it work.
Okay.
So, if I was going to apply this to the whole of life, that would be difficult. The whole of life all at once.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's very domain specific, the state of flow, which is why, if you put me on an ice skating rink with a load of, ice hockey players, I would be terrified and useless. So I couldn't apply it. I would need a model. I would need to know what playing ice hockey is.
Yes.
First, I suppose I'd need to know the rules of the game.
Yes.
But I imagine the rules of the game become internalized, as in you don't need to think about them all that consciously.
Yes.
Just as a tennis player doesn't consciously think about where the lines of the court are. That's just given.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the model would be something. I know nothing about ice hockey. I have no idea why I came up with that. Maybe
Well,
because I don't know anything about it. That's why I came up with it.
If you stick to music, you've already
Yeah,
talked about simplicity.
yeah. So with music, it's like, music is a language. So what's the vocabulary? That's the way I approached it.
Yeah.
And I need to know what I'm saying, just as I need to know what words I am saying to you.
Yeah.
And I need to know I'm saying them in the right order.
Yeah.
Otherwise, at best I'll sound like Yoda, and at worst I'll make no sense at all. So we've got to have that basic idea of words in groups, words in syntactical groups or idiomatic groups.
Yeah.
So it is with music. It's a slightly bigger model than language, because I think that's our model for language. I think our model for language is words grouped together. Certainly for English language, which is the language I speak fluently, that's what I'm doing. I'm not really doing anything else. I'm not thinking of what's the subject of the sentence. I'm not even thinking, is it a sentence?
Yeah.
Not consciously. I mean, I know that, but I'm not thinking it consciously. So with music, it's rhythm cells in the matrix, blocks in the keyboard. Yeah.
Rhythm cells in the matrix. So language is actually a useful touchstone, perhaps, to get a sense of on an everyday level what a state of flow is. And would you say it's fair to say that most humans, when they're talking casually, generally to each other, speak in a state of flow?
I would say, yeah, because one of the interesting things that Mikhail talks about is this. How does he put it? This kind of balance between the difficulty of the task and your level, if you like, so that you're entertained by what you're doing. So yes, talking like we're talking now is a state of flow, because I am using language in order to express interesting concepts that might not be easy to say. If I start speaking in platitudes, if I start saying, well, at the end of the day, it all comes down to just whether you're in flow or not, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you're in flow, it's all easy. It's just easy. You just let go and you flow and it's all easy, which I think is probably, interestingly, I've just kind of tangented there slightly. We can perhaps come back to that. That's what a lot of people think a state of flow is, and it is not. A state of flow is a highly, what's the word? Like, this is what Mikhail is saying, isn't it? It's a high level thing. It's a peak state.
Yes.
When you're in a state of flow, you're not just going. I was reading a book by one of my favorite authors, the New York marketer whose name's gone out of my head.
Seth Godin.
Seth Godin.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the state of flow and how dangerous it is. He was actually being a bit negative about it. And I can understand why. He was saying how dangerous it is that people just think, oh, all I have to do is, just let go and everything's great, just in the state of flow. Yeah, that's not how it is. If I just drilled scales fast and did them, that's not a state of flow. So I think you can speak like that. You can speak like me playing scales mindlessly.
Yes.
I could have a conversation with you where we say absolutely nothing really, apart from some nice platitudes that sound familiar and comforting. That wouldn't be a state of flow for me.
And what's the difference? So if we go into this a little bit, when someone's talking platitudes, if you relate that to music, the musical equivalent would be saying something. So I suppose a platitude is something that is commonplace. It's something rehearsed that is not, in a sense, truly original and intended. Is that what
it's
we
not
mean?
intended? I think if we say the word, if we get the original, makes it artistic. Expressive is a different. Even in sport, it can be intended. So I think intended is the best word because it kind of covers anything, whether it's an expressive thing or it's just like, I don't know, sprinting. You can sprint in the state of flow because there are some very useful things your mind can address moment by moment, a model, whilst you let yourself go and run, which is a very intuitive thing. So any activity can be done in the state of flow when the mind is engaged in an extremely focused, intensive kind of way. It's an intensive focus. So I would say I'm in a state of intensive focus right now. It doesn't feel effortful though.
Yes.
It's an effortless state, but it's still intensive. And that intensive focus is having me come up with the vocabulary that I need to say what it is I want to say.
And
the task is to say it, and the intensive state of focus is coming up with the vocabulary. Yeah,
exactly. And the effortlessness, I suppose, comes, of course, through practice, but what precedes that is having a simple model that is, I guess, right for the task. That is,
well, that's it. Yeah, and I think
I know that sounds very vague what I just said.
No, I don't. I think it's right for the task is a good phrase. I think right for the task. So like words in groups is right for the task of learning a language. I think if I had learned languages at school with that simple model, things might have gone better.
Right.
It's like it became very heavily grammatical and there was lots of rules and it felt difficult. It became more difficult than it should be, which is not me advocating the sloppy, like Seth Godin was talking about. Yeah. Oh, he actually had an example of it. I think it was people hitting baseballs. He quoted some kind of study that had been done where people were very rehearsed, very repetitive task, hitting a baseball, hitting it again, and they reported feeling good. But of course, it didn't make them any good at baseball because in the real world, you don't just get exactly the same thing. So it's the danger. It's the danger of seeing that we're making things easier or more pleasurable. That's kind of not rigorous. It's very, very rigorous. Yeah. It really is super rigorous, but it's sort of simple. If I just know that language is saying words that I understand as well, not just any words that I know, words who that point to specific concepts that I know, words that I know grouped together into some kind of idiom or syntax. If I know that's the model, then really learning it isn't that big a job. You just need to practice that.
You just need to practice that. Yeah. And then this is probably a good moment to ask the question, what stops us from... So what we've described, or what you've described, is, in a sense, a simple model of the state of flow, right? It's like having a model an appropriate thing for the job that describes well what needs to be done, and then focusing on that and letting the intuitive part sort of not do it, because both parts are doing it. The intuitive,
Well, no, I think the intuitive part does it.
the intuitive part does it, and the
Yes,
other
I
part
think
is
so.
simply watching,
Or maybe directing at most,
maybe
but
directing at
like a
most.
navigator, but it's not the driver. Yeah,
It's not the driver.
yeah.
So obviously you've been teaching for many years, and what stops people from getting into a state of flow?
Oh gosh, I mean, in music, in music, it's specifically in music, it's a kind of very deep insecurity.
Right.
I think everyone has some degree of self-expressive trauma about you know being musical, being rhythmic, being musical is hard for us because we were naturally like that as little children, and we were told that we mustn't do that. We mustn't be loud, and we mustn't speak in a sing-songy way like a small child, because it's annoying. And so we fear that being musical is synonymous with being annoying. So that's huge. That's a huge thing. I think then what built on top of that, I mean, maybe similar traumas can exist with sport. I mean, people have early traumatic experiences sometimes with sports. They might have been hurt, perhaps playing a game when they were little, or maybe they were discouraged, humiliated. Maybe they weren't a big, strong kid, or all these kind of early experiences have a basic original trauma that impacts our self-confidence in that area. And so this is more in the letting go side. This is more in, it's not so, it's kind of it crosses both. It's the the other thing that I think is really important is this. Does he call it? He has a funny phrase, doesn't he, Mikhail? Something like he uses the word entropy. But he was describing the DMN, the default mode network, where if you just daydream, what state are you in? And I think in our default state, when we're just not really doing anything, which is almost like the opposite of a state of flow, where we're really intentional, who are we? How much conflict is there? I think we all notice that sometimes we can start fault finding and remembering that horrible experience. So it can float into consciousness, it can bridge across. So we all have these basic sort of insecurities, and they can be quite significant in certain areas of our lives, often in areas that we really want to do as well.
I
Do you
see.
see what I mean? I mean, tennis might be something that I've always really wanted to do, but I've never had the confidence because my early experiences playing tennis with my parents were humiliating in the extreme. So I've never been able to pursue that.
So these are sort of domain specific or activity specific past experiences that effectively create a certain kind of anxiety or fear, a very
deep sort of like, it's more like a brain fog, because I think often we've repressed the feelings. So, if you were bullied as a child, you don't necessarily feel the rage and the fear and the shame that inevitably you're going to have wanted to express, but you didn't necessarily express it. So you repress it. And so what you have in a sense is more of a freeze response.
I got you.
And so you get in this freeze response, people tend to get brain fog. They feel they can't do it. It's almost like their bodies just won't do it. It's like a horse refusing a fence. It's like the lights are on, everyone's watching, you haven't had a drink, go and dance, hit the dance floor, everyone's watching you. Your body would just say no, you know what I mean? Be like, that's too traumatic. But this is interesting because at that moment, you'd emotionally reason, because you don't have direct access to the memory of that original trauma. Or probably not. And so what you'll probably do is create in the emotional reasoning another reason, which would be simply performance anxiety. I won't do it well enough. Even if everybody said, but we don't want you to do it well. We want you to be silly. We want to have a laugh. We just want you to dance and be stupid. And we want to laugh, because you still wouldn't want to do it because you'd have this original trauma, but you would believe it's because you're not good at it.
So the implication of this is that if it's an activity that someone doesn't feel, but obviously we're not disregarding sort of talent, right? So different people may have different intrinsic levels of abilities, whether that's sporting, musical, linguistic. Everyone is different. So we're not disregarding that. So everyone has a different starting position. So we take that as read, just for completeness. So what we are saying is the implication of what you're saying, that if someone doesn't have baggage or a particularly difficult past experience conditioning in relation to an activity, then they would, all else being equal, be able to more easily, provided they wanted to do it, provided they were interested in the activity,
Yeah.
be able to get into a state of flow more easily and focus more easily.
Yes, I think so.
I'm
Obviously,
sort of thinking of everyday things like, sometimes I think, and I do a bit of writing, and sometimes, sometimes the dreaded admin has to be done. But sometimes, as I sit down for 45 minutes, I feel like, I'm fully in it. It's relatively straightforward. I'm totally immersed. I don't even hear the doorbell. It's like, when I'm doing some other more enjoyable writing. It's a mundane task. I haven't been looking forward to it. However, I get into it and, I do it and it's done. And arguably that's a state of flow. And I would imagine people in their lives find such states in sort of, I think it's Mihai calls it micro flow.
yeah,
Little,
it's like
little,
occupational therapy, isn't it? It's kind of nice. You feel calmer because you're doing something, you're doing it well, you know what you're doing. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
So it's about our beliefs, and these beliefs can be hidden. They can be more in the the
Oh,
unconscious
it's the
self, the more
unconscious
intuitive
side.
self, and and they can float up into the more conscious and but whatever. But it's about our beliefs. If I believe something is difficult or impossible for me,
Yes.
then that's when having this kind of methodology that I have around, you know, I don't even like to call it performing. I don't know what I call it. So like just doing stuff. This methodology is really helpful because if I can focus my mind, I
Yeah.
can I can sort of like bypass those beliefs. I know what I can do, and I just do that. And so those doubts in my mind they haven't necessarily disappeared permanently. They might come back if I daydream and stop
Yeah,
doing the
yeah, yeah,
thing
yeah,
that
yeah.
I'm doing. But whilst I am in my state of flow, I'm 100% confident. Oh, that's a big word, but you know what I
Well,
mean.
exactly. And this is why I suppose having an accurate model, as best as we can come up with,
Yeah.
is so important because that's the thing we're going to focus on that will allow us to then step into the state of flow with the whole body and
Yeah.
mind and whatnot.
Yeah, because I mean, if you before I was about to go on stage and perform, if somebody starts saying to me, but you don't play this piece in the right way, it needs to be faster. Those some of the notes that you play, they sound weak. I heard you when you were practicing.
Yeah.
Sowing these seeds of doubt. If I started listening to those potentially those thoughts that are planted consciously, imagine that, as I say, bubbling up, kind of crossing the bridge between these two selves. They could come up from within me, those doubts.
Yeah.
I don't even need that person. I've got gremlins in my own head. We all do. We have gremlins in our own head that will whisper all kinds of thoughts that will stop us doing it. I mean, how must somebody who is halfway up a mile high rock face, people who do stuff like that,
Yeah.
they have learned not to listen to what are genuine, genuine insecurities.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that they're being reckless, although that's arguable. But maybe recklessness almost comes into it. Maybe risk and recklessness and being audacious,
Part
being
of the
part of the
attractiveness of the
discussion. Yeah, I think with music it is too. I am deliberately ignoring my insecurities.
yeah.
But because I know that as long as I focus on this model and execute it moment by moment, accurately, efficiently, I'll be okay. I'll be
So
fine.
do you find that, so one of the implications of this, going back to what Seth Godin says, people who let go, they talk about sort of, or just kind of doing it. Would it be fair to say then there's this, does the word discipline come into it? And discipline is not my
Yes.
favorite word.
No, not mine, but it does. It's right.
So it's a bit like saying, okay, there's this sort of letting the intuitive part, the mind, the soul, whatever we want to call it, sort of intend and express. However, that still needs,
It's discipline. I mean, obviously, discipline's got this connotation of like punishment, and
yeah,
it's also got a very teleological idea of it being going towards an outcome and
yeah,
getting results. So that's why I don't like the word either. But all it really means is sticking to a path, doesn't it?
yeah,
Sticking. So it's the right word in a way. It's focus. It's saying I really have to focus my mind.
yeah.
I really have to not listen to those gremlins in my mind. I must just do this.
Yeah.
And it must be clear. I think that's one of my favorite words. It must be absolutely clear. And however clear it is, this is one of the beauties of practicing
Yeah.
in this way. However clear I have it right now, and however marvelous I might feel I'm doing, marvelously I might feel I'm doing, doesn't matter. It can be clearer.
Yeah.
It can be clearer. I heard I can't remember her name, the former the current Wimbledon champion. She was talking in the interview yesterday.
Rebecca,
Yeah, right,
Rebecca,
that's right.
if
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, that's right.
pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah. And she was saying, they said, "Well, you've got a fearsome serve, you know, it's like amazing." And she's going, "Yes, but there's a lot of changes that I make every day, and my coach is helping me, and it can improve a lot. It's becoming a good weapon in my." It's like, what is she saying? Surely she just goes, "No." And this is the interesting thing. It's like, I never feel like I'm good at what I'm doing,
Yeah.
which you might think, well, where's the reward in that? Well, to an egotistical, which I often call a dark side way of doing a skill,
Yeah.
you know, doing it from the ego, yeah, that's not rewarding. You're going to have to feel like a hero to enjoy it. The enjoyment comes from going, hey, look at me playing the piano, I'm amazing. No, I don't feel amazing. I feel more like I'm just walking or breathing or talking, and I want to do it better.
Yes.
I really want to do it better. Every day I practice, and every day I want to do it better. And one of the words that, as I say, I use all the time in my mind is clear. How clear was it? Could it be clearer? Always it can be clearer.
Yeah. And to clarify, when you say it doesn't feel amazing, you mean from a sort of ego perspective, but
Yes.
from an experiential
Yeah, that's a different
joy.
amazing. Yeah.
Because it's interesting because, I read the inner game of tennis, reread probably for the fifth time very recently. And Tim Gorby, who I'm also a huge fan of, also now because I'm playing a bit of tennis as well, is that he also talks about how this sort of egoic, I'm a hero kind of results are also faulty because what that part of the mind believes is good and strives for doesn't even yield.
Oh, it's so true. So many people think they have just done a marvelous karaoke performance, and everybody disagrees with them. You know, it's like it's the extent of, especially in music, I feel the extent of the mind's ability to delude itself is extraordinary. I think we almost translate what we are playing into a performance that we've heard in our heads. That's kind of the nature of karaoke, the nature of passive. Karaoke is basically how we do music when we don't do it fluently. It's the way that we all naturally do it. It's very dark. We don't know really how we do it. It's pure mimicry. It's very strange. So that's what we do. We karaoke music. We can so think we sound like, I don't know, someone might be singing a I don't know, Whitney song, and they think they sound like Whitney, but of course they don't.
So
But that's what they're hearing in their head, you see.
part of the model is, and it's part of the practice, is about sort of, in a sense, I don't know, reconditioning is really getting to know what it is, not
Yes.
a passive idea. Because if for a non-expert, they can look at a field. I can look at Alcaraz's forehand, and I think he just goes whoosh. But there's probably a lot of micro elements that are, I know there are built into it. So
But
part of what we're saying, sorry, go on.
sorry, I was just going to say, but it's not necessarily complex. It just needs practice.
Exactly. And that
I
goes
mean, it
back
is
to having,
sorry, I should redress that. It is complex, but we don't have to turn it into conscious complicatedness.
exactly.
The intuitive self will take care of that complexity. You have to have a go. There might be some very simple principles that you could apply a model.
Yeah.
You try and do an Alcaraz style forehand. Good luck with that. It
Right.
won't be very good. So you try again. You go again. You apply the model again. You apply the model again. You get clearer.
Yeah.
You get clear in your mind. You get rid of all this mimicry. You're not him. You don't have his body.
No, exactly.
Whatever. But there will be some principles that you can apply to produce a forehand of that type, but only with practice.
And what you're kind of describing when you talk like this, Phil, and of course, we've talked about similar things before, and you encourage me in my own music practice, is the word I'd like to sort of bring in is this word play. And, you mentioned children at the beginning. I'm wondering, how we can bring that in, and how important that is to not only music, but learning anything and entering into a state of flow in anything.
It's so central. I mean, it's funny because you were talking about the word discipline. I don't mind the word discipline when I apply it, when I put it with the word play. It kind of almost changes its whole nuance. It becomes quite a nice word. Disciplined play sounds kind of nice. My favorite phrase probably would be, and I don't use it too much, I'd avoid the word rigor altogether, because it's just, I don't know, it sounds worse than discipline in a way, but
It sounds
rigorous.
heavy, but it is right.
It is correct. We need to be rigorous. It's rigorous play. Oh, you see some kids, there's certain, and some personalities are more drawn to rigorous play than others.
Yeah.
And some kids, you see them and they play very rigorously. They like to have things organized. They like to have this feeling of knowing what's going on. They want order. They want that. And yeah, if you could do that if you don't do it in a playful way, it's just fascism. So that's awful. So if you do it in a way that's very, very playful, then it's this balance between the two, isn't it? And I think the play, I suppose the play is what nurtures the letting go, or the intuitive, spontaneous side of us.
Yeah.
And the rigor nurtures the focus side of us. But it's also kind of the other way around as well, because there's a feeling of play in going, like, almost like I mentioned brain chemicals, but I would say there's a sort of, I would say that's on the dopamine side, really. The conscious mind is trying to get a reward, is trying to get that dopamine hit. The other side is probably more things like serotonin, oxytocin, those kind of pleasure hormones in a way. So I would say that there is a dopamine kind of pleasure, which is playful in going tick, tick. Yes, I know what I'm doing. And then there's also a sort of, I think that in itself can produce more of a feeling of the deeper pleasure. So they cross-fertilize each other. So, but it is at a basic level, yeah, playful is spontaneous, rigorous is focused.
Yeah.
And once those two are paired kind of magically, it just, yeah, it's like produce a feedback loop. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Getting adults to play, that's, I only teach adults. Getting adults to play like children, like, when I say children, I'm talking about kind of like preschool. I'm talking like pre-5 level of playfulness, like genuine wonder, like not knowing, not that kind of, most adults are like, yeah, I know. Like, someone wrote to me the other day and he put red and blue stickers on his keys. And of course I wrote back and said, please don't do that. Take them off, because that's too visual. It's not. So adults they think for themselves. I mean, marvelous. We should be encouraging people to think for themselves, I suppose, but it's dangerous, isn't it? Because if they go off on some tangent with their overthinking, it's a real danger. Kids don't necessarily do that kind of thinking. They're more in a state of wonder, like pure curiosity.
And exploration, curiosity.
Your exploration,
And
like,
they iterate. They try something. If it doesn't work, then they sort of do
they
it again.
adjust and change. Yeah, they just change, adjust, and repeat. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
that's play, isn't it? That's what play is like. It's not so outcome orientated. The other thing about adults, and I think this is this sort of psychology, this is one of the things about letting go that's hard as well, is adults like to get things right. I mean, we're conditioned to like to get things right. It feeds this performance anxiety so much, so it's really toxic, but it's how it is at school, isn't it? We're asked a question, we have to know the right answer. If we don't know the right answer, then in a sense we're punished for that, even if it's just with bad marks. Whereas play is tolerant to failure. Play welcomes it. You learn. I always say it's like in music, there's kind of like the versus the principle. So it's like if I play that and I expect that, I could go, or I could go, oh, of course, that was a mistake. That's okay. You learn from your mistakes. So it's a kind of growth mindset. She called Carol Dwight, that her name, I think. Growth mindset idea that you're not fixed. It's not a fixed mindset where you get the results now, you pass or fail. It's a sense of like, well, I had to go. Even in the moment, you can even think that was partly good and partly bad.
Yeah.
There's something good there. There's always both. I'm never satisfied.
Yeah.
But I'm never unsatisfied.
So it's almost like so if you think about an adult mind, with all its conditioning and cultural habits, and we aren't kids, so adults aren't kids, which is sort of stating the obvious, but it's sometimes useful to see that, we're not, what we're saying is we're not saying you have to literally be a kid, but what we're saying is we need to try and find that level of tolerating mistakes, which then requires good focus on the right thing, which is moment by moment attention.
And adults are good at that.
Adults are good at that, exactly.
Yeah.
Unlike kids. Unlike
Most
kids.
Yeah, no, it's true. To get little kids to sit still and focus is a challenge. Yeah, as adults we can do that more easily, especially if we're interested. Obviously, you foster that feeling of curiosity, wonder, interest, and yeah, it's. Are we still kids? So this, to me, that's a hugely interesting question. We behave in this civilized way. It comes back to this being civilized.
Yeah.
You know, I often think someone like John McEnroe. You know, he was like a big kid playing tennis. If he hadn't channeled that, maybe he wouldn't have been as good.
Yeah.
You know, we have to channel that toddler energy to some degree. Obviously, if it goes out of control, then it can be very, very destructive.
Yeah.
But if it has the balance of the other side, I think we do still have it is almost like an inner child and an inner adult. We could almost see the split as that. We're all walking around and we're a civilized adult and we're also a spontaneous child.
Yeah.
It could be almost like our rational self and our emotional self. You could say that.
Especially in the expressive arts. I mean, when you think about music and, particularly the more expressive genres like, heavy metal, which I'm a big fan of, and soul music, which are sort of very emotionally charged, highly expressive genres. Sometimes you watch live performance. I mean, I haven't seen that many soul performances, but certainly in the metal performances, they look like kids, sort of really going for it, but in a very
with soul music, it
way.
has it. Exactly, and with soul music, it has its kind of roots steeped in gospel church music, where it's transcendent. It's almost beyond being a child. It's becoming, I don't like one with the universe. Sometimes I like to use analogies of like being just like nature. I think we've talked about this before. Like become a volcano, become the ocean. Children are better at that, obviously, than adults, perhaps by nature. But I think we have it in us. This is the thing. I think the problem is that we live in a very repressed culture, a very hyper civilized. We behave like machines, which I know is kind of one of your sort of hobby horses, how the ego becomes very mechanized and very sort of kind of rigid in its operating. And I think our culture supports that. We become you switch on your average sort of daytime chat show, and I'm not sure they don't need to be human. They could be AI, really, those people. No offense to them. I don't mean to be mean or anything, but do you know what I mean? They're very affable, but there's not much feeling there. Do you know what I mean? You don't get a sense that at any moment they could break out.
Yeah.
And we need that. We're far too adult, I think, especially in Western culture. We're far too adult. Maybe I should say, especially Western culture. It's probably different styles of it in different cultures. So
no, absolutely. And what you're describing is a kind of seriousness, which what you're saying is there's a need. Perhaps it's inherent in becoming an adult, but what you're saying is perhaps there's a huge cultural component that we can let go of, or at least we have to let go of a huge amount of the seriousness if we are to engage in anything and learn quickly and help us enter into a state of flow more easily.
Well, that's it. It's like even in Star Trek, the Vulcans like to be all very rational and everything, but they also tune into all this really very, very deep spiritual stuff and do mind melds and stuff. You always need a balance of sort of like, you could use that as an example, mystical and rational, or emotional and rational, child, adult, nature, and I don't know what would it be like, sort of controlling nature. You know what I mean? Like harnessing it and surrendering to it. I often think letting go is a kind of surrender.
Yeah.
So if we can surrender enough, we can access that childlike state. This is the point, that you cannot become. I don't think you can become a fluent musician. I don't think you can enter the state of flow, probably in any discipline, without letting go, without accessing that spontaneous, childlike. It might feel like a terrible risk, but it's a childlike state. you also can't enter it if you don't have the adult ability to focus, to control, and to limit your mind's friskiness. You know, it is a kind of meditation. This is it's a mastery of mind, practicing to a state of flow, which is, I think, why Maslow is right ultimately, that
Definitely.
it is a sort of transcendent state, almost, you could say, that
Absolutely.
it has a spiritual dimension, that you become more than just an animal.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
absolutely. And in a sense, sometimes I think sort of this basic principle that goes through, that's been sort of permeating our discussion in terms of using this great gift which we have, this cognitive mind, reflective mind, and be within sort of everything else, the physiology, the body, connecting to the world, to the universe. That's sort of the human, I don't want to use the word problem, but the human experience. We have this thing which we can use to reflect, but then that can lead to over control, maybe focusing on incorrect models. But it's sort of about using this mind we have in the appropriate way. Again, I come up with vague statements. What
Well,
is the
it's
appropriate
interesting what
way?
you're saying. I mean, if we could remove the somewhat hideous patriarchal aspects of the Garden of Eden story,
Yeah,
you know, I don't believe it was Eve who gave Adam that apple. I
yeah.
think they probably both fancied that tree of
Whichever way
knowledge. You
around
know,
it was.
it doesn't matter, does it? It's like someone fancied that knowledge, and that knowledge isn't. We can't make knowledge the enemy completely,
Absolutely.
but in a way it is. In a way, knowledge is sin. You know, I know we're both a bit of a fan of Krishnamurti, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Krishnamurti is always saying the problem is we think we know shit.
Yeah,
We don't know anything.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
thing, that we ultimately, everything is unknowable. But with the way we operate, that executive side of us does need knowledge.
Yeah, and it's about, I suppose, having the humility to know, because even, you're a master of your craft. You've been, probably one of the best in the world, in my opinion. You use the word, I know this from our discussions, and I bring it in, you use the word model. So even you acknowledge that this is a representation, it's highly accurate and it's useful and it allows us to do the job, but it's not actually the thing.
It's
What
not actually the thing. It's almost like a portal to it. This is the
exactly?
thing. It's like I'm not one of those kind of savant musicians. That there are a few of these people. Most people might have met one, who can do a lot of the things that I can do as a fluent musician, but they don't know how they do it. It's just a strange intuition. I wouldn't call them dark siders. I use the word dark siders for dark siders are people who do it for their ego,
Yeah, yeah,
which means that we can all flirt with the dark side. You know,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
Star Wars analogy. I always say to people, don't flirt with the dark side. Just remember, Darth Vader was not happy. You know, powerful maybe, but not happy.
And he lost
Um,
in the end. I know
he
it's
lost in
Hollywood.
the end.
I know it's
That's
Hollywood, but he lost.
exactly. So the dark side attracts us all, especially if the force is strong in us. If
Yeah,
we have a strong talent, if we can do something, we love something, it can pull. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people with this kind of savant ability, this very, very, I mean, people can be autistic, have learning difficulties and this sort of
sure.
thing. And yet they might have some amazing savant
Absolutely.
ability that they can't articulate consciously. So they have a different kind of access. I don't have that access to music,
Yeah,
not to that extent. Anyway, I could play by ear a little when I was little, but I used to love, my sort of jazzy soul, Stevie Wonder, and some of those harmonic progressions and so on. They're quite cool. They're quite interesting, and I couldn't find them easily.
yeah,
Of course, when I used my model and practiced over a period of time, by the time I think it took me a couple of years of really practicing, then I knew what they were. I could hear them. So it was in me, but it wasn't accessible. This is the way I see it. It's like my inner musician is kind of limitless almost,
yes,
powerful beyond belief.
yeah,
But I need a portal, I need a way in. So the model is kind of the access. It's how I get to unblock
yeah,
all of that. So I focus in order to let go. I focus in order to not believe the limiting beliefs. I
yeah,
focus in order to sort of plug into something or become bigger version of something. It almost feels like I become a channel. It almost feels like if I sing really well, I have this very bizarre experience that it's not me singing, I'm sort of being sung.
And losing yourself is something, people who are in the zone, and you described it as a musician, is sort of being in the moment where the separation between the activity, the person and the activity almost become sort of become secondary.
That's it. And I think when we mimic, when we use our mirror neurons, or however we do it, they're not very keen on mirror neurons nowadays, are they? But anyway, however we do it, you see someone doing something and then you just do it. We don't know what enabled us to do that. It's almost as if there is some kind of Jungian collective unconscious going on, and we have access. People take drugs like hallucinogenics and think they become someone else, and then have their skills miraculous and things like this. It's extraordinary, really, just how much we might be capable of, except that we have limiting beliefs. So it's funny I've mentioned drugs. I would say that music
don't do drugs.
No, don't do drugs. Music is a way. I think a lot of musicians do drugs because music is kind of like a drug. It gives us access to these kind of transcendental states, if you like, states where and but I think it's not just music. I bet it's the same in any activity that you really do it in a state of flow. It will give you access to a feeling of being beyond your limited self. So this other self is like not your limited self. I mean, we've all had dreams, haven't we, where we think, how the hell did I dream that? It's like extraordinary. We can do extraordinary things. So it's sort of accessing that realm of the unconscious, if you like.
Definitely.
And that's what the focus gives us. The model is like a vehicle to get into that ocean of possibility.
We've talked about so much, Phil, and I'm sure this is, hopefully the listeners will take something away from it. Would you say it's possible? Would it be possible to say that, if you were to give someone advice, they want to learn anything, right? Or something, let's say it's music or a sport. Is there one bit that you would say is more important that you'd say, remember this? Or is that difficult?
I think the most important thing is this idea that there are two versions of you living concurrently. There's the more limited, the more rational, conscious, executive, critical mind, which needs focusing. And needs a clear model to focus on. And then there's this intuitive, unknowable kind of genius part of you that needs to be let loose, and getting them to cooperate, getting them to work together that's the key.
That's the key. And I suppose that becomes a lifelong practice.
That's the lifelong practice. And as I said, I've often said, if I could live my life in that state of flow, I would. It's just difficult, unfortunately. It takes practice. And how do you practice everything and anything that you do? It's like, and maybe you'd be an exhausting person if you were constantly in a state of flow. I think I'd probably start to just need to take a nap,
That's a discussion for another day. I just realized we've been talking for nearly probably over an hour now. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for introducing the concepts and explaining what sort of simplifying, I would say, what for most people can be quite an opaque subject. So thank you very much for taking the time. And
thanks so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
I'll see you very soon. Thanks again.
Bye.